Saw dudes, Atlas Prime is the resident one-punch man of Warframe, and after the pseudo-exalted weapon rework, he got even better. Before the rework, Atlas was relegated to niche setups that had far too many loops to get up to speed. Now he can perform at top shape with any weapon loadout, not that he needs one since he's trying to catch hands with anything alive. Atlas can now one-punch acolytes in any HVT with ease. He is a landslide given form, and just like the mountains, he doesn't give back what he takes. Let's get started. Before covering the builds, let's go over Atlas's groundbreaking abilities. If you already know the frame's abilities, please skip to the build sections. Atlas's passives are just as rock solid as he is. His first is that while on the ground, Atlas is immune to knockdown effects. This does not prevent pushback effects, however, and does not mitigate the recoil animation from firing arc guns such as the Corvus and Velocitus. Atlas's second passive involves pickup items known as Rubble. It is unique to Atlas and is dropped from petrified enemies and rumblers on their death. Rubble restores health to Atlas if he is missing any. If he is at full health and unable to be healed, it will instead grant additional armor that decays over time. Each petrified enemy and rumbler will drop one piece of Rubble that restores either 50 health or 50 armor. However, petrified enemies killed by Landslide grant 75 health or armor from their drop Rubble. Rubble pickups remain on the ground for 30 seconds before crumbling away. Rubble's armor bonus is capped at 1500 points, and the bonus armor decays at a rate of 5 per second. Picking up new Rubble delays the onset of the decay by 2 seconds. The rate is doubled to 10 per second if Atlas stands in a nullifier's bubble or inside a fog or null combo into Grampus's nullification field. Finally, Rubble can be vacuumed by companions with either the vacuum or fetch mod. Atlas's first and most notable ability is Landslide. On cast, Atlas expends 25 energy to charge forward to punch a target enemy up to 12 meters away. The target and enemies within 4 meters are dealt 350 impact damage as a melee strike. The AoE damage from the attack bypasses obstacles in the environment and does not diminish with distance. While dashing, Atlas's health is invulnerable. Additionally, recasting the ability during this duration will perform consecutive punches that increase the move's range and reduce energy cost. On the second punch, the impact radius is increased to 6 meters and halves the energy cost, and the third punch and onwards increase the impact radius to 8 and quarters the energy cost. At base, Landslide has a 35% critical chance, 2 times critical multiplier, and 15% status chance. Additionally, it is a moddable pseudo-exalted weapon, which appears on the arsenal as Landslide Fists. Despite being moddable, it does not act as an equipped melee weapon, meaning it cannot block or perform heavy attacks. Landslide can be recast within a 5-second window to perform a repeating combo chain, granting 20 ability combo counter points. Landslide gains 1 times additional damage per combo multiplier, up to 12 times damage at 12 times combo. Tectonics is Atlas's second ability. Casting the ability causes Atlas to expend 50 energy to erect a bulwark made of stone with a base health of 3750 and additional health equal to 500% of Atlas's modded armor. Upon activation, the bulwark is invulnerable for 4 seconds. Incoming damage that is absorbed during the invulnerability period is converted and added to the bulwark's health. After the invulnerability phase, whenever the bulwark receives damage, the amount of health lost multiplied by 1 times is converted into slash damage and inflicted on all enemies near the bulwark. Atlas can maintain only 1 bulwark at a time. Reactivating the ability will cause the bulwark to compact into a boulder that rolls towards the current direction of aim, dealing 600 impact damage per second to enemies that are dragged along its path. After rolling 15 meters or hitting an environmental object, the boulder will explode and inflict 500 puncture damage to enemies within a radius of 5 meters. Casting Petrify on the bulwark hardens it into a petrified bulwark. Boulders created from a petrified bulwark gain 200% rolling velocity and have their rolling distance increased to 30 meters. They also inflict 200% bonus damage on rolling and explosion damage. Atlas's third ability is Petrify, where he uses 75 energy to force enemies within 14 meters in a 60-degree field of view to relive their most embarrassing memory. All enemies caught within the cone are instantly turned to stone out of shame, never to recover mentally. Emotionally petrified enemies have plus 50% damage vulnerability and are incapacitated for 20 seconds. Petrify will not solidify enemies behind environmental obstacles unless Atlas has line of sight. Using Petrify on a currently solidified enemy will not refresh the stone duration. Once the enemy breaks free, it can be petrified once again. Bosses, captured targets, enemies with overguard, and enemies frozen by 10 cold stacks cannot be petrified. Finally, we have Atlas's final ability, Rumblers. The ability costs 100 energy to cast and causes him to summon earthly elemental golems as he instantly petrifies all enemies into stone within a 6-meter radius for 10 seconds. Once summoned, the Rumblers will roam the battlefield seeking nearby enemies to attack. They last for 45 seconds unless they are killed or manually detonated. Each Rumbler possesses 1200 health and 500 armor, which scales with ability strength, and a speed multiplier of 1, which scales with ability range. Rumblers inflict 2000 impact damage and stagger the target backwards with each melee attack. They can occasionally throw stones that home in on enemies to inflict 500 impact damage and ragdoll enemies hit. If the ability is reactivated, or if Atlas becomes incapacitated, active Rumblers will self-destruct and inflict 1250 blast damage to enemies within 6 meters. Killing petrified enemies or self-destructing Rumblers will drop 1 piece of rubble for Atlas to pick up, restoring 50 health or providing the aforementioned 50 bonus armor. Rumbler Rubble provides reduced amounts of health or armor if it sustained damage to its health before expiring. Lastly, casting Petrify on injured Rumblers will instantly restore their health to 100%. Time for the game loop. Start missions by using Petrify on the first set of enemies to get some rubble accumulated. Then cast Landslide on the petrified enemies and collect the rubble to build armor. Ideally, you want to reach 1400 as soon as possible to take advantage of Rubble Heap, which increases Landslide's damage and speed while eliminating its energy cost. For non-helmet setups, use Tectonics to provide cover. For helmet setups, use the buff to deal more damage with Landslide or reduce enemy aggro. When you have enough energy, cast Rumblers to distract enemies. Keep punching enemies into a fine powder with Landslide after petrifying them, and you will be golden. Rinse and repeat. This Atlas Prime video features 4 unique builds with their respective helmet setups. Most of the helmet abilities correspond to one mod setup, but each has their quirks. As usual, I recommend using 3 Omniforma, especially if you consider maining the frame. Use 1 in the Aura slot, 1 in the Exila slot, and 1 in the main build section for the best amount of flexibility. The first build is a non-helmet setup and is one of the few health tank builds I have ever made. It can be used in base deal path up to about level 1000 with some fairly good quality of life. Past level 1000 though, it will begin to fall off, and I would recommend switching to a helmet setup of your choice. For the Aura, we will go with Steel Charge since it increases melee damage, which directly impacts Landslide. For the Exilist, Cunning Drift is the best choice since it increases Landslides and petrifies effective range. Blind Rage and Transient Fortitude increase ability strength for much higher ability damage and increase the loot drop chance from Ore Gaze, the augment mod for Petrify. Prime Flow increases energy reserves for Landslide and general ability spamming. Archon Stretch increases ability range and also allows Atlas to regen 2 energy per second for 5 seconds after affecting an enemy with an electricity proc through abilities. Landslide can be modded for electric damage, making this a valuable tool in reducing energy strain. Adaptation allows Atlas to health tank on top of the 1500 armor gained through Rubble. It does require hits to stack up, but it can be potent in Steel Path. I would not use adaptation in level cap applications, since the damage reduction amount is too small to keep Atlas alive. Ore Gaze is the augment mod for Petrify, causing enemies turned to stone to be scanned into the codex and have a chance to make them drop extra loot. The extra loot chance is 25% at base and scales with ability strength. Rubble Heap is a passive augment for Atlas, which makes Landslide cost no energy, increases its damage, and increases its speed when his rubble count is above a threshold of 1400. This augment is mandatory, since it makes Landslide a free ability to use and reduces the energy strain that Atlas has to deal with. The final augment is Path of Statues, which makes Landslide leave a petrifying path for a short period. This can reduce the number of times Atlas needs to cast Petrify, reducing energy expenditure over time. Enemies that are petrified by Path of Statues still have a chance to drop additional loot from Ore Gaze. Now let's cover the second build, which marks the start of the helmet setups. This build and those following are level cap viable, unlike the first. For this setup, there are 3 helmet choices: Nourish, Roar, and Breach Surge. Each has their pros and cons, but before covering them, let's go over the mod configuration. Brief Respite is the aura and allows Atlas to effectively shield gate with the use of catalyzing shields. Cunning Drift remains in the Exilus slot for the ability range increase, which is essential for applying damage to more enemies in a crowd. The ability strength buff is handled by Blind Rage and Umbral Intensify. Transient Fortitude is subbed out because ability duration should be kept neutral for helmet abilities. With lower durations, recasting becomes a major hassle since it drains a lot of energy. Prime Flow increases energy reserves for helmet spamming, and Archon Stretch increases range and grants an energy regen passive. Equilibrium is a major player in keeping Atlas's energy reserves afloat and works beautifully with Ore Gaze, since it causes enemies to drop health orbs, which will now refund energy. This also works well with a companion equipped with Synth Deconstruct, which can force enemies to drop health orbs on death. Catalyzing Shields allows Atlas to shield gate and makes survivability a ton easier. One cast of a helmet ability or Petrify is enough to fully refresh the 1.33 second shield gate. Ore Gaze causes petrified enemies to have a chance to drop more loot, and Rubble Heap makes Landslide cost no energy, increases its damage, and increases its speed when his rubble count is above a threshold of 1400. Now to discuss the 3 helmet abilities. Nourish is a solid, albeit bland option nowadays. However, it lends itself well to Atlas, given his annoying energy issues. Nourish grants landslide viral damage, which is always welcome, and an energy multiplier. This affects equilibrium, Archon stretch, and picked up energy orbs. With Nourish, energy issues are a thing of the past. The enemy stagger upon being hit also gives Atlas a nice grace period to refresh his shield gate. Roar is the next option and also increases the damage of landslide. However, it is generally used for landslide builds that use a damage over time element, since it double dips in those damage calculations. It can be used extremely well with toxin, electric, or gas builds, but is even better for landslide builds that utilize melee influence, since it can triple dip for easy crowd clearing. If you are not a fan of swapping Bane mods, Roar is the best option for you. Finally, there is Breach Surge, a niche option that is more rooted in fun than anything else. Casting the ability creates an 18-meter blind radius. Enemies in line of sight and within range are blinded by the surge for 16 seconds. These blinded enemies receive a 10% chance when damaged or 100% chance when killed to release a spark surge in the form of a homing projectile that seeks the head of another enemy within 10 meters, dealing radiation damage equal to the damage dealt to the surged enemy, then amplified by a damage multiplier of 2. Atlas punches enemies very hard, so hard that he deals tens of millions of damage per strike. Multiply this by 2 at the very least, and you can have whole crowds of enemies decimated with just one additional ability cast. Keep in mind that this ability's crowd control is very redundant since the Atlas already has Petrify. However, like I said, it's a very fun option to bring out from time to time. The next helmet setup utilizes Resonator. The mod configuration is very similar to the last setup, with the only change being the Conductor augment in the exile slot over Cunning Drift. While this setup loses a smidge of ability range, it makes up for it in mitigating the aggro that is brought to Atlas. Conductor allows Atlas to command the rollerball by pressing the Resonator ability key again. Recasting the ability into crowds causes enemies to focus on the rollerball and makes the approach much safer. The helmet ability does not offer any extra damage, but it is great in missions where enemy density is too high to make 2 rumblers effective. The last build for Atlas is a Shock Trooper build meant to be used with melee influence on the Landslide build. Instead of using Orgaze, we will be using the Shock Trooper augment and the Shock ability. Since we no longer have Orgaze, use a companion equipped with Synth Deconstruct to make better use of equilibrium. This build is tailored for clearing trash mobs and does allow for some team support since you can apply the Shock Trooper buffs to allies. However, to make the most of melee influence's damage application, you will need to use the appropriate Bane mods on Landslide. If you are too lazy to do so, like me, I would highly recommend sticking to either Nourish or Roar. Let's go over the Blue Sentinel's arcane options. For the most part, Atlas likes a combination of Arcane Fury and Molt Augmented. These 2 arcanes stack the damage of Landslide further, allowing it to scale into level cap easily. However, if you don't have one or both of the arcanes, suitable replacements are Arcane Energize and Arcane Avenger. Arcane Fury is stable on Atlas since it increases melee damage for Landslide by 180%. This buff is great for a baseline increase in damage and is trivial to activate given the insane crit chance that is afforded to Landslide through Blood Rush and other external factors. This arcane is near mandatory, but you can go with Arcane Avenger if you do not have a high enough copy to make it worth your while. Molt Augmented is a solid increase in damage for Landslide after it stacks up. Additionally, it can buff the helmet abilities that are put over Tectonics, making it better for most loadouts. The extra ability strength is also great for Orgaze since the extra loot chance is affected by ability strength. If you are farming or just want to bring Atlas to any mission, any bit of extra loot chance is great to have. Now for the substitutes. Next up is Energize, which doesn't do anything for damage but does assist with ability upkeep. Since we are running Blind Rage on Atlas, the extra energy can be useful. I would not use this arcane if you are already running Nourish, since it would be overkill. Arcane Avenger rounds out the substitutes for both Fury and Molt Augmented. While Avenger does not offer the same damage increase as Arcane Fury, it does offer a flat 45% crit chance increase for all weapons, including Landslide. This affects weapons that Atlas wields too, making it valuable for those with high critical multipliers but low critical chance, like the Kodos Berithrix or Kuva Nukor. Naturally, the best arcane combo to run is Arcane Fury and Molt Augmented, as already mentioned, presented in all of the footage you will see. It is a tried and true combination and allows Atlas to scale into all content easily. If you run missions quickly and do not care for scaling ability strength, you can swap Molt Augmented for either Arcane Energize or Arcane Avenger. Onto Atlas's heavy hands. There are 4 main builds for Landslide Fists, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. As always, please experiment to find out which one you prefer. The first build is a raw Toxin build meant to leverage the raw damage from both Prime Fever Strike and melee exposure. While Toxin is a potent damage over time element, its effectiveness dwindles with enemy armor, meaning that you should consider applying corrosive procs with a primer weapon. Even without one though, the raw damage will usually kill targets faster, so the choice is yours. Condition Overload works well with priming and increases base damage. Blood Rush increases crit chance with the Rising combo counter, which is easy to do with the pseudo exalted Exalted weapons. Galvanized Steel increases base crit chance and increases crit damage on kill. Organ Shatter increases crit damage further. Weeping Wound similarly increases status chance to Blood Rush, allowing Landslide to apply more toxin procs or corrosive procs if using melee exposure. Galvanized Elementalist increases status damage and increases status chance on kill. Finally, Gladiator Might increases crit chance and has a mini Blood Rush set bonus, increasing crit chance that scales with the combo counter. If you want to further increase toxin proc damage, Gladiator Might can be swapped for a Bane mod, or you could just use Roar. The next build is the Electric Nuke build, meant to be used with either Shock Trooper, Roar, or Breach Surge. Using Nourish is okay, but it will dilute the electric status weighting, making melee influence procs less common. This build is incredibly good at clearing adds thanks to melee influence. The inclusion of a Bane mod is important, since it triple dips damage over time calculations when applied through melee influence. The bump in damage can make quick work of even the toughest enemies, so please do not forget to swap the mod out for the appropriate faction. Landslide Build 3 still makes use of melee influence to new groups, but this time it drops the Bane mod in favor of Organ Shatter. As such, this build is meant to be used with Roar on Atlas since it is considered a Bane modifier and triple dips the damage calculation. The inclusion of Organ Shatter makes direct hits much more lethal and allows HVTs to get hit harder. It's also a great solution for those of you who are lazy like me and refuse to swap Bane mods between missions. The final build is a Gas Affliction setup, which makes Atlas's Fists weapons that violate the Geneva Conventions. By using melee afflictions, enemies that are ragdolled build up more gas status procs, which increase the size of the cloud. Because the base damage of Landslide is so high, the gas clouds can deal significant damage up front, often insta-killing enemies who walk into them. Most of the build stays the same when compared to the last build. However, the inclusion of Lasting Sting is important to note, since it increases the duration of gas clouds, making them a landmine for enemies to step into. If you prefer to just punch people and don't like fart clouds doing your bidding, this can be swapped for Organ Shatter. The best helmet for this build is between Nourish, Roar, and Breach Surge. All of these abilities play well with gas status. For Landslide Fists, there are only 3 arcanes worth considering: Melee Afflictions, Exposure, and Influence. Melee Afflictions is great for clearing trash mobs, particularly those that can be ragdolled. Landslide can ragdoll enemies, but it is limited to certain ones. Enemies with Overguard and Acolytes cannot take extra procs from Afflictions. It can scale extremely well into a mission like Void Cascade when ad clearing is extremely important. I recommend using this arcane on the Toxin build or the Gas build. Gas lends itself very well to crowd clearing and makes gas clouds that can kill enemies as soon as they step in. Melee Exposure is for one thing and one thing only: raw damage. It adds up to 240% corrosive damage, which is great for punching harder. If you are building for gas damage, the extra corrosive procs provided by the arcane can help shred tougher enemies. Lastly, there's Melee Influence, the best trash clearing arcane in the game. This arcane only really works if you have electric damage on the Landslide build. As such, you should use this arcane with either the electric only build or with the Shock Trooper helmet ability. With Shock Trooper, you can easily use another element like Toxin to cover a lot more bases. Keep in mind that this arcane is best used against mobs, not tougher units. If you need more punching power against single targets, use Melee Afflictions, or better yet, use Melee Exposure. I will usually stick to using Melee Exposure since it is easy to upkeep and generally does well against all enemies. Atlas, for the most part, does not struggle with clearing crowds, thanks to Landslide's damage range. Also, enemies can be taken care of with weapons as well, so it's generally unnecessary. Despite that, I recommend using each build and corresponding arcane to find out which you prefer. For the Focus School, I will still recommend Madurai. Power Transfer is great for reducing the casting time for helmet abilities, Petrify, and Rumblers. Landslide casts are nearly instant and are very short. The biggest vulnerability for Atlas is his other abilities. Sling Strength increases ability strength by 40% after using 2 consecutive Void Slings. The extra ability strength can be nice for Orgaze since the loot chance scales with it. Otherwise, it's nice for directly increasing Landslide's damage and the effectiveness of helmet abilities. Void Strike and Void Fuel are not useful to Atlas's kit, but are nice for any weapons he wields. Void Strike applies a massive weapon damage buff, and Void Fuel increases ammo efficiency by 40% while Void Strike is active. Admittedly, these abilities are only used in a pinch, like when you run out of energy on Atlas and need to kill Xmas units to get some energy back. Phoenix Talons is great for Atlas since the 30% physical damage bonus affects his Landslide Fists. Even though most of the damage is coming from elemental mods, the 30% boost to impact damage alone is nothing to scoff at. This boost is always active as well, meaning there are no special steps to get any extra damage in. Despite Despite my recommendation for Madurai, you can still use Zenerek with confidence. The extra energy regen afforded to Zenerek makes it valuable in unfavorable conditions. For late game content though, it would be somewhat annoying to use and often falls off. For level cap Void Cascade, I will still recommend using Madurai. As for Archon shards, this is what I would recommend for a more well-rounded setup. There are some tweaks you could make depending on your preferences. I used 4 Tauforge Violet shards and 1 Tauforge Emerald shard. 3 of the 4 Violet shards were attuned for melee critical damage. Since Atlas with Prime Flow sits at 755 energy, the damage boost of all of the shards doubles, making Landslide hit harder. One of the shards is attuned for an equilibrium effect to further improve energy economy issues. If you are using Nourish or Arcane Energized, you could swap this to a crit damage shard. If you don't have Violet shards or just don't want to craft them, you could use Crimson shards attuned for melee critical damage instead. It won't offer the same level of damage, but it is cheaper and easier to obtain. The 1 Emerald shard is nice for increasing raw damage, especially priming enemies with a corrosive weapon. However, it's not a requirement and more so lends itself to weapon use and landslide spam. It could always be swapped for an Amber shard for better casting speed, or yet another Violet shard for higher melee crit damage. To top things off, let's cover Atlas Prime's weapon choices, not that he needs them, thanks to his heavy hands. While Atlas makes quick work of foes with Landslide, weapons are always nice to consider since they make the job easier. For primaries, I suggest using the Ceto Prime, Prismagorgon and Karnon, and Tentaclaxion. Ceto Prime is a great shotgun and standalone weapon, but I will always recommend it for Warframes that have an exalted or pseudo-exalted weapon. Its glaive attack can prime groups of enemies easily, making them easy pickings, especially for Landslide. Prismagorgon and Karnon might seem like an odd choice, but it has its use for producing rubble with the Gorgon exclusive Metamorphic magazine mod. The mod increases the mag size and total ammo maximum by 90%, but also causes 20 cumulative hits to solidify enemies just like Petrify. Enemies that are killed in the state drop rubble, but do not activate the effects of Orgaze. Still, it's a nice weapon to have if building and maintaining rubble is difficult. The final primary weapon on this list is Tentaclaxion, which can act as a primer since it is a chain beam weapon. It can also supply energy orbs through the Glaxion exclusive mod, Photon Overcharge. For secondaries, I like using the Epitaph Prime and Grimoire. Epitaph Prime is a great primer weapon and is hard to beat. If you are unwilling to use a primary weapon that can inflict a bunch of statuses, then Epitaph Prime is a great default pick. Using secondary fortifier on it allows Atlas to shrug off statuses and knockdowns while airborne, making it a great piece to have in harder missions. The Grimoire offers a good bit of priming, but is mainly here for the energy regen. With the Zata Invocation, Altfire hits will grant 1 energy per second to 10 energy per second for 20 seconds. The energy regen almost completely mitigates Atlas's poor energy economy before activating Rebel Heat. Finally, the melee options that are best for Atlas are Furax, Wraith and Karnon, and Praetos. Furax, Wraith, and Karnon can use the mod Amalgam Furax Body Count, which increases the fire rate of secondary weapons by 45%. While Atlas does not have regulators like Mesa Prime, this can be useful for Epitaph Prime or the Grimoire. Praetos is generally a movement stick, since it can grant sprint speed, slide strength, and parkour speed with drifting, grace, and evolved ascension. As a general rule, Atlas does not use melee weapons conventionally, since Landslide can deal with enemies much more quickly. The melee options, especially this time around, are purely for utility. And that is it for the video. Moving mountains are pretty scary, especially when you take a look at what Atlas can do. Can I recommend Atlas Prime? Yes, and not with many catches. His landslide damage is undeniably easy to pull off and very player friendly. While his loop can be bland and downright brain numbing, landing those sweet red crits on poor enemies never seems to get old. The only issues I can see with this kit is he wants constant pressure or else he risks running out of energy or invulnerability windows. Other than that, he has a solid frame that can easily go to level cap if you so choose. Despite the somewhat high investment, Atlas does not need too much to get the stone rolling. Even introductory mods can fill in the place of prime ones, so don't think too much about it. Atlas is an amazing frame, and one that increases loot gained in missions. It's hard to argue against him when he keeps sweetening the pot. If you need a frame that punches before asking the hard questions, go for Atlas Prime. So yeah, you can go kick rocks, but remember, they might punch back. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any suggestions or thoughts, leave them in the comments. As always, thank you all for watching, and happy farming. Stay safe.